This is world conditions, which is a really interesting one to be talking about right now, isn't it? You know, all of this. So we start right in with Master's predictions. A devotee asked, what predictions did Yogananda or other saints make about future hard times? And this is written January 9th, 2000. Swamiji put out a lot of energy when we switched, 1999 to 2000, Y2K. It came to be called year 2000, Y2K. But for those of you who didn't live through it, Y2K was a great big thing that we were living through. And Swami put out a lot of energy that there would be some cataclysmic event because of the inability of computers to cope with it being 2000 instead of 1900. None of it happened. It was a great big nothing. But what it did is it gave him a way to really activate a certain amount of practical evaluation and action about what we might need in difficult circumstances. This is another thing, just by the way. I was in Los Angeles not a few years ago, and the banners on the light posts, and it wasn't a doomsday thing, it was just like, are you ready for not for cataclysmic events, but in the event of earthquake or something like that, do you have food, water, a few emergency supplies? Everybody just thinks now about, you ought to have emergency supplies. You need food. You need these things ready because something might happen. At the turn of the century there, it was pretty radical to be thinking like that, but now everybody just thinks like that. Oh yeah, wildfires, who knows what's going to happen? It's another one of those thought forms that's just moving through that doesn't have Yogananda's name on it, but starting in 1950, he's been talking about this. So, Master spoke of three things. A depression, which he said would make the one in the 30s look like a picnic. Now that is really a strong statement. World war, and quote, cataclysm. So those are the three events that Master said would happen. World wars. He actually spoke of more than one. So that means widespread violence. And of course, war nowadays would be nuclear once it begins. We've held off all these years, nobody has yet used a nuclear bomb, but everybody has them. And of course, that would require retaliation once it's used. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm just looking at it. Depression is also pretty easy to see for a whole lot of reasons. I won't go into it, we'll just finish the letter. He spoke of the causes of the first two, money, mania, greed, and materialism for the depression. Communism and a clash of old and new values, Kali Yuga versus Dwapara Yuga, for the war. He didn't define or describe what he meant by cataclysm, but obviously ascribed whatever it will be to world karma. So we have depression because money mania has become completely out of control. We'll have war because Kali Yuga and Dwapara forces are fighting against each other. And communism, and I'll talk about this, what he means, but communism to Master is institutionalized atheism. I mean, the essence of Master's profound concern about communism is that it's atheistic and it places no value on individual life. It's intent upon world dominance and its system, and it has a complete disregard for individual life, because without the idea of divinity, without the idea of a creator and us all being equal manifestations of the divine, then human life is cheap. What does it mean? Only when you understand that we are here for God realization and that the infinite power itself dwells within each one of us. This is why we love one another. But once you become atheistic and there's no greater value than my pleasure, you can do anything you want. So he talks more about this later. Therese Neumann, who was a great Catholic stigmatist, stigmatist who bore the marks of Jesus on her own body, and for many years, every Friday would relive the crucifixion of Christ in vision. She was remarkable and dramatic, but she was also a profound and deep saint. She never ate or drank. She was sustained entirely directly by cosmic energy. The only thing she would ever take by mouth was a consecrated wafer, the host, in the Catholic Mass. And if the wafer wasn't consecrated, she could tell and she would spit it out. And Master went to visit her when he was going through Europe in 1935 and 36. And he writes a whole chapter in his autobiography of Yogi about her. I've read a number of other books about her, and she was in every way astonishing. Master said that she was Mary Magdalene in a previous life, which is why she continually relived the crucifixion of Jesus and was so intensely engaged in that experience. Because she was one of the disciples who stayed with Jesus every step of the way, all the way to the tomb, and she was the first to see Jesus resurrected also. Master said that was her in a previous life. So Therese Neumann also said something interesting that may touch on more than one of these points. She told an American soldier that America would suffer economic destruction as a result of the breakup of its land mass. Who can say? But that's quite interesting, isn't it? Therese certainly had a state of consciousness that causes one to want to take what she said seriously. She was very well known, and when devotees found themselves in the part of Bavaria where she lived, many people from many countries came to visit her. That's why the reference to an American soldier. Could even have been a soldier who came to liberate the country. Hitler knew about Therese Neumann, and Hitler was tuned in enough to spiritual power to know that she actually posed a threat to him. And it was always a little concerning for everyone as to whether or not he would act against her, but he never did. Everyone in this century whom we'd consider a saint or to have had heavenly visions, such as the many visionaries who have seen the Madonna, including Padre Pio, who also endorsed what some of the visionaries had seen, has spoken of great trials. The children of Fatima, the children of Medjugorje, the children of Garabandal, all of these were young people who had visions of Mother Mary, and in all cases, their visions included Mary telling them what have not been widely publicized, because Mary told them secrets. And she told them secrets that were about very, very difficult cataclysmic events coming to the world. So, we'll see. I mean, Garabandal and Fatima were in like 1917 and maybe in the 20s. I'm not quite sure when Garabandal was. But Medjugorje is in current times, literally, even now. It's been going on for about 30 years, but it's still going on. So this is not like ancient history. As for the first of Master's predictions, there was no specific timing on it, the Depression. However, no one seems to disagree that we are in an incredible financial bubble. No bubble in history has failed to burst in time, leaving countless people bankrupt. The people during every bubble have considered their times the exception, Yes, it always happened in the past, but it's not going to happen this time for these reasons. These are the reasons why it's not going to happen. There never has been such an exception. Moreover, it looks increasingly as if the stock and bonds market is getting too hot to last. Swami writes this in 2000. Swami started talking about, well, Master started talking about these predictions in 1950. Swami talked about them from the first day I met him, and he never stopped. So 70 years went by, and every year Swami would stop and ask the question, well, is this going to be the year? And he kept up with a financial newsletter, sometimes very fringe financial newsletters, because he didn't feel that from the central source you always got the whole story. And every year he was ready to see, he was always reading the signs to see if this would be the year, but not yet. So we'll see. As for war, I think people are waking up to the fact that communism is about as dead as a hibernating grizzly bear. Swami had he was very concerned about Vladimir Putin. And he says here, Putin, Russia's new boss, has eyes like a crocodile. I don't think the deaths of hundreds of millions of people would be anything more to him than an interesting statistic. What I've suspected, moreover, is that the breakup of Mother Russia has been a wound that many a Russian will simply not tolerate forever. Just a moment. The Russian mind doesn't react swiftly as the American does. The Russian broods, nurses its wounds, and awaits its opportunity, preferably until the enemy gets the idea that maybe the bear is dead after all, and walks over and bends down to take a closer look. What an image. Wow. Master spoke of communism as a very real and global threat, and not one that would simply blow away with a sea change in the economic scene. The Madonna at Fatima said the same thing in 1917 or 1918, when communism wasn't even perceived as the great threat it has since become. The same thing has been said by many others. And Swami explains elsewhere, as I explained, because it's atheistic. And it's atheism and spirituality that is the real dichotomy. And communism is the powerful atheistic governmental form where human life is cheap. Meanwhile, the old communist guard hasn't faded from power. The KGB, the Politburo, the satellite republics, all of them are the same people, merely dressed up in new clothing. The KGB is very active in, and perhaps even as, the present Russian mafia. Russia as a nation has known ruthless dictatorships for centuries. They've had no actual experience in democracy. Democratic sounds have been made and have been applauded by wishful thinkers in the West and elsewhere, but such has been the inexplicable pattern of thinking among liberals since the Russian Revolution. This is a very unpopular point of view that Swami's putting forward, especially earlier, but he never hesitated. No, I think war is definitely, here. I don't believe Master would have believed a word of the praise that has been heaped on modern Russia. It isn't modern. It's the same bear disguised as a rug. What people write of the former communist system, my thought has been, I'll believe it when I see something else actually at work. So far, the new Russia thing seems a shill. No, I think war is definitely a likelihood. Very strong words. I'm not qualified to comment, but I understand the principles behind what he's saying. I remember this would have been like in about 1991 or 1992 when whatever was happening, I don't follow history and current events that much, but that was when Russia was really changing and it was going to be this whole new era and so on. And somehow or another it was being talked about in a satsang in our church, and there was a man there who was from Bulgaria and had escaped from Bulgaria because he had been a protester, and he finally realized he was about to go to jail. So in the middle of the night, he fled. And, he was speaking from experience, and he said, those people will never give up power. He said, if you think they're giving up power, they're not. They're never going to give up power. And Swami's comment was very similar. He says, people don't just, don't just behave in a dictatorial, oppressive manner and grasp for power for themselves and then just wake up one day and say, oh, I think we won't do that anymore. He said, karma doesn't work like that. So this is what he's talking about. Master spoke of the timing of the economic crash and world war in vague terms, something like toward the end of this century. Well, we're past that end, but we're still in the same general time zone. He wrote this in 2000. I'd say we need to be very careful. Swami was living in Italy at that time. We here in Italy have gone to the American consulate in Rome and given them our email addresses. A wise precaution, I think. If an emergency arises, they'll do something to get Americans out if possible, if things don't move too fast for them. So I think I'm just going to stop there because now we're going to go into Cataclysm, and it's several paragraphs. So I think that's enough to give us nightmares tonight. So I don't think I need to read about earth changes and the rest of us to have us all stay up and not be able to sleep. Now, I'm just going to add, just so you feel a little more cheerful, Master said the entire purpose of all of these difficulties, economic, war, cataclysm, whatever it is for one reason. It's that people need to turn to God. And he said, when all of this is washed through, he said, he spoke of Americans particularly, he said, we'll have half as much wealth and be much happier. And he's just, now, from the point of view of us, and I'll talk about this more as I go along, if the whole purpose of these hard times is to awaken us to the need for God and to motivate us to try ever more deeply to be in tune with God, why wait? Because if we are acting, if we are meeting the karma head on before it crashes over our heads, and are responding in the way that the difficulties and trials are intended to get us to respond, then the harmony of what we're doing will be a tremendous mitigating factor on the whole world and also within whatever sphere of influence we ourselves are living in. So that's the real answer, which is love God ever more deeply. And this is a powerful motivation not to wait. God bless you, my friend.